I think what is happening is Ukraine is getting caught in the middle of American domestic politics. And I think Mr. Giuliani is trying to change the narrative from what has been the case for the past 2+ years in the United States, allegations of collusion between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign, and is now trying to argue that there instead was collusion between Ukraine and the Clinton campaign, and on top of that, that there was some corrupt activity in which the former vice president's son was engaged, Hunter Biden, with his position on the board of Burisma. And so it seems to me that there is a strong push in which Ukraine is getting caught in the middle as we in the United States look ahead to our 2020 elections. And he, as you know, was planning to come here this week to try to meet with Mr. Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials to, as he said very explicitly in an interview with the New York Times, to meddle in the investigation. And an investigation that, as far as I understand, ended before Mr. Shokin was replaced as Prosecutor General. And I don't quite understand what investigation he was pointing to. So it's a very complicated issue, but there is, I think, a rather simple underlying theme, which is Mr. Trump's supporters are arguing that there was collusion between the Clinton campaign and the Ukrainians, and that also Hunter Biden was involved in activities here that he shouldn't have been. I think that's what it boils down to, essentially. With the conclusion of the Muller report, which found that there was no criminal activity between the Trump campaign and the Russians, there was no conspiracy. The term collusion in English is not a legal term criminally. The issue would have been whether there had been a conspiracy between Trump campaign officials and Russian officials, and Mueller and his team found that there was not evidence of that. It did find that there were extensive contacts, but not to the point of crossing the criminal threshold. Despite that, the Mueller report also found that there were instances of obstruction. So what the Mueller report stated was it could not conclude that Trump had committed any criminal activity, but it also could not exonerate the president. It could not find him not completely innocent. And what we see since the conclusion of the Mueller report is a strong effort by committees in the US House of Representatives, which the Democrats control, to launch further investigations into the activities of 2016 between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And so I think the hope of the Trump side that this would go away once the Mueller report was completed, they're realizing that is not happening, that the Democrats in the House are continuing to investigate, continuing to push. There is also the element where Mr. Lutsenko, the Prosecutor General, also seems willing to go along with this, where he apparently was in touch with Mr. Giuliani back in January, if not before, had given some interviews to John Solomon from The Hill, and seemed particularly interested in trying to criticize the US Embassy here. The impact on US-Ukrainian relations is what I'm most worried about. I don't want there to be an impression in the United States, in Washington, or in the Trump administration that Ukraine or Ukrainian figures or the new president and people around him are anti-American or anti-Trump. Zelensky won in a landslide victory on April 21st. I happened to have been here to observe it. And I don't think anyone knows what his positions are. I'm not sure he has fully formed his positions on things. I don't think there's any reason to suspect him of anti-Americanism or an anti-Trump view. He is somebody who is, I'm sure, scrambling to put a team together to figure out how to address the challenges that Ukraine faces. My guess is the last thing he wants to do is to get involved in an American political issue. And frankly, I would suggest that his response in saying he didn't want to meet is the right one. Mr. Giuliani apparently was interested in coming here to meet with Zelensky, the president-elect, to urge him to continue an investigation of American activity in Ukraine and with Americans. The United States for years has advised Ukraine and many other countries in the region, as you transition from the communist system imposed on you by the Soviet Union, that you should not politicize the legal and judicial procedures, that they should be independent, they should be based on evidence, they should be based on rule of law. And what Giuliani was proposing to do was to come here to meet with the president, the new president-elect, to urge him to investigate all of this. That's not the way it should be done. If there's evidence, produce it. If there isn't, move on. But it's best for Mr. Zelensky, I think, to focus on what should be his priorities, which is dealing with corruption in Ukraine, dealing with Russian invasion and threats, focus on addressing the economic situation here, and keep his attention focused on the situation here in this country. It's a little unfair, I think, frankly, for outsiders to come here when Zelensky has to put a team together. The Rada apparently is going to decide today when the inauguration will be. He has to get ready for that. He has to address the needs of Ukrainians who voted for him. There are high expectations for him. He's got the Russians to deal with. Putin challenged him 3 days after his victory. And to have this thrown at him, I think, is not very fair for him. My impression from what I know is that she has been an unfortunate victim caught in the middle of this. I've known her for maybe 15 years, going back to when I served in the State Department in the George W. Bush administration. Everything I know of her is that she is an excellent career diplomat. She's not a political figure. I've never heard her voice opinions of the current president one way or another, pro or con. She represents the United States. She is the president's representative here in Ukraine. She was nominated before the US election in 2016. And she's been here through a difficult time for Ukraine, first and foremost. So I think it is unfortunate and unfair that her name has been dragged into this. As I say, I think she's done a great job throughout her career in a number of difficult and challenging circumstances. And I know she cares passionately about this country, as well as U.S.-Ukrainian relations. I think she's represented the United States very well, and I know she's leaving a little earlier than was anticipated. Her plan was to leave this summer, but I think she should go out feeling very proud of what she has done here.